The heavy double doors of Westbrook Conservatory closed with a soft thud as the last student left for the day. That was the signal Magdalena had been waiting for. She pushed her cleaning cart out from the small supply closet and began her nightly routine, starting with the main lobby where polished marble floors reflected the overhead lights. As she worked, her daughter Sophia trailed behind, homework balanced on her knees as she sat on a bench near the grand staircase. At 17, Sophia was tall and slender like her mother, with the same thoughtful eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She had been coming to work with Magdalena since she was 12, after they could no longer afford a sitter following her father's departure. "I'm almost done with math," Sophia called out, her voice echoing slightly in the empty hall. "Then I just have the history essay." Magdalena nodded as she wrung out her mop. "Good. When you finish, you can help me with the practice rooms upstairs." The practice rooms were Sophia's favorite part of the building. 20 small rooms, each with a piano, lined the corridor of the second floor. During the day, these rooms were filled with students perfecting their craft, the jumble of different melodies creating a chaotic symphony. But at night, they stood silent and waiting like sleeping giants. Sophia tucked her schoolwork into her backpack and followed her mother upstairs. The hallway was dark except for the security lights that cast long shadows on the walls. Magdalena handed her daughter a cloth and a spray bottle. "Start at the end and work your way back," she instructed. "I'll finish the bathrooms and meet you halfway." Sophia nodded and walked to the last practice room, breathing in the familiar smell of wood polish and sheet music. She had cleaned these rooms hundreds of times over the years, but still felt a little thrill each time she entered one. These spaces held magic, the kind that transformed ordinary people into artists. She turned on the light in room 20 and began wiping down the piano, carefully avoiding the keys as her mother had taught her. Through the window, she could see the city lights twinkling in the distance. The conservatory sat on a hill, overlooking a city that never truly slept. Neither did music, Sophia thought. It was always there, waiting to be brought to life. As she moved to the next room, a sheet of music caught her eye. Someone had left it on the piano, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Sophia picked it up, studying the notes that danced across the page. She couldn't read music well, but she recognized this piece. One of the older students had been practicing it for weeks, and Sophia had listened through the door, memorizing each note, each pause, each subtle shift in tempo. She glanced over her shoulder. Her mother was still busy with the bathrooms, and the hallway remained empty. Sophia placed the sheet music on the stand and sat down at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. She wasn't allowed to play. That was the first rule Magdalena had given her when she started bringing Sophia to work. "We touch nothing but what we clean," her mother had said firmly. But the music called to her like it always did. Sophia pressed a key, then another, the soft notes barely audible. She closed her eyes, remembering the melody as she had heard it through the door. Her fingers moved more confidently now, finding the right keys through memory and instinct rather than training. The music flowed through her, imperfect but heartfelt. She didn't notice when the door opened wider. "That's not how it's written," a voice said from behind her. Sophia jumped up, nearly knocking over the piano bench. A tall man with silver-streaked hair stood in the doorway, his arms folded across his chest. Professor Williams, she recognized him from the faculty photos in the main hall. "I'm sorry," Sophia stammered, her heart pounding. I shouldn't have. Sit back down," he said, his voice neither angry nor kind, just curious. "Play it again." Sophia hesitated, looking toward the door, wishing her mother would appear and rescue her from this situation. But the hallway remained empty, and Professor Williams was still watching her, waiting. Slowly, she sat back down. "I don't really know how to play," she admitted. "Not properly. I just listen and try to copy." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You learned that piece by ear?" Sophia nodded, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Play," he said again, this time moving into the room and closing the door partway. Sophia turned back to the piano, her hands shaking slightly. She took a deep breath and began again, trying to recall exactly how the piece should sound. Her fingers stumbled over a few notes and she winced, but continued playing until she reached the end of the section she knew. When she stopped, Professor Williams was silent for a long moment. "You're the cleaner's daughter," he finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. My name is Sophia. How long have you been listening to the students play, Sophia? She thought about it. 5 years, maybe? Since my mom started working nights here. He nodded slowly as if calculating something in his head. And you've never had lessons? No, sir. What else can you play? Sophia bit her lip. Bits and pieces of things. Whatever I hear enough times to remember. Professor Williams moved closer, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. There's a student showcase next Friday evening, he said abruptly. You should come. Sophia blinked in surprise. Me? Yes, you. It's open to the public, though most attendees are family members of students or potential donors. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. Show this at the door. I'll put your name on the guest list. Before Sophia could respond, the door pushed open fully and Magdalena stood there, her eyes widening at the scene before her. Professor, I'm so sorry if my daughter disturbed you, she said quickly, slipping into the room and pulling Sophia up from the bench. She knows better than to touch the instruments. Mrs. Reyes, isn't it? Professor Williams asked, his tone softening slightly. Your daughter wasn't disturbing me. Quite the opposite, in fact. Magdalena's grip on Sophia's arm loosened, but her expression remained wary. She needs to finish her work. Of course, the professor nodded. But before you go, he turned to Sophia, holding out the card again. The showcase, come. Sophia looked at her mother, who frowned in confusion, then back at the professor. Slowly, she reached out and took the card. Thank you, she said quietly. Professor Williams nodded once, then left the room without another word. As soon as he was gone, Magdalena turned to her daughter. What happened? What did you do? Sophia explained about the sheet music and how she had given in to the temptation to play. He wasn't angry, Mama. He invited me to a student thing next week. Magdalena took the card from Sophia's hand and examined it. Professor Richard Williams, Department Chair, Piano Performance, she read aloud. She handed it back with a sigh. You know we can't afford trouble, Sophia. If I lose this job, I know, Sophia said quickly. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. But even as she said the words, a seed of something new had been planted inside her. Hope, maybe, or possibility. For years she had lived in the shadows of this building, watching others pursue their passions while she cleaned up after them. Now for the first time someone had seen her. Really seen her. They finished cleaning in silence, but Sophia's mind was racing. The student showcase. What would it be like to sit in the audience instead of emptying the trash cans after everyone left? To be a guest rather than invisible? On the bus ride home to their small apartment, Sophia stared out the window, the professor's card tucked safely in her pocket. Their neighborhood was a world away from the conservatory. Crowded buildings with peeling paint, corner stores with bulletproof glass, streets that grew louder rather than quieter at night. What are you thinking about? Magdalena asked, breaking the silence between them. Sophia turned to her mother, seeing the tiredness etched into her face, the hands roughened by years of cleaning. Do you think I could be more than this? She asked softly. More than we are now? Magdalena's expression softened. She took Sophia's hand in hers, running her thumb over her daughter's long fingers. Piano-playing fingers, though neither of them had realized it until now. You already are more, she said simply. You just need the world to see it. As they walked the final blocks home, Sophia thought about the music that had always lived inside her, waiting for a chance to be heard. Maybe, just maybe, that chance was finally coming. She didn't know that in just over a week. Her life would change forever, starting with a room full of people who would laugh when she sat down at a piano, not knowing that soon, masters of music would line up to hear her play. The week passed in a blur for Sophia. By day, she attended her public high school, sitting through classes that felt increasingly distant from her thoughts. By night, she helped her mother clean the conservatory, her eyes lingering longer on the sheet music left behind, her ears more attentive to the lingering echoes of the day's lessons. Professor Williams didn't appear again, and Sophia wondered if he had forgotten about his invitation or changed his mind. Still, she kept his card tucked in her jacket pocket, running her thumb over its embossed lettering whenever she needed reassurance that the encounter had been real. On Thursday night, as they cleaned the main performance hall, Magdalena brought up the showcase. Are you still thinking of going to that student thing tomorrow? She asked, polishing the wooden armrests of the theater seats. Sophia nodded, wiping down the stage floor. If you don't mind. I'd have to leave school a little early to get ready. Magdalena was quiet for a moment. What will you wear? The question hadn't occurred to Sophia until now. She pictured the conservatory students in their tailored blazers and designer dresses, then thought of her own wardrobe, mostly jeans, t-shirts, and a couple of simple dresses for special occasions. Maybe my blue dress. The one from Aunt Lucia? Magdalena nodded slowly. I'll press it tonight. The next day crawled by. Sophia's last teacher marked her absent without comment when she slipped out early. At home, she showered and braided her hair in a simple style, then put on her navy blue dress. It was nothing fancy. A cotton blend with small white dots and a modest neckline. But it was the nicest thing she owned. Magdalena appeared in the doorway of their shared bedroom, watching as Sophia applied a light coat of lip gloss, her only makeup. Beautiful, she said softly. Like your grandmother, Sophia smiled nervously. Are you sure you can't come? Magdalena shook her head. Someone has to clean up after their fancy party. She approached her daughter and straightened the dress collar. Remember, you belong anywhere you decide to go. Hold your head high. The bus dropped Sophia off a block from the conservatory at exactly 6:45 p.m. The evening sun cast long shadows across the building's grand entrance, where people in formal attire were already arriving. Luxury cars pulled up to the curb, discharged elegantly dressed passengers, and drove away. Sophia clutched Professor Williams's card in her hand, suddenly aware of how out of place she was. For a moment, she considered turning around and going home, but her mother's words echoed in her mind. You belong anywhere you decide to go. Taking a deep breath, she joined the stream of attendees. At the entrance, a student in a black suit checked names against a list. When Sophia approached, he looked up with a practiced smile that faltered slightly as he took in her simple dress. Your name? He asked, his pen hovering over the clipboard. Sophia Reyes, she replied, handing him Professor Williams' card. Professor Williams invited me. The student's eyebrows rose as he read the card. He scanned his list, flipping through several pages before finding her name scrawled at the bottom. Yes, here you are, he said, returning the card. The performance hall is through the main lobby and to the right. Program booklets are on the table inside. Sophia nodded her thanks and walked into the building that she knew so well, yet felt like a stranger in tonight. The lobby had been transformed from its daytime efficiency to an evening elegance, with soft lighting and flower arrangements that hadn't been there when she left this morning. Students and parents mingled in groups, their voices creating a gentle hum of excitement. She picked up a program from a table staffed by two girls who barely glanced at her, then found a seat in the back row of the performance hall. As she flipped through the glossy pages, she recognized several names, students whose playing she had heard through practice room doors, whose empty water bottles she had thrown away, whose forgotten sheet music she had neatly stacked. Is this seat taken? Sophia looked up to see Professor Williams gesturing to the chair beside her. She shook her head and he sat down with a satisfied nod. You came, he said. Good. Thank you for inviting me, Sophia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He waved away her thanks. You clean these halls every night, yet you've never heard what happens when this place is full of music and people who appreciate it. That seemed wrong to me. Before Sophia could respond, the lights dimmed and a woman in a sparkly black dress walked onto the stage. Welcome to our spring student showcase, she announced. I'm Dr. Patel, Dean of Performance Studies. Tonight, you'll hear from our most promising young artists as they demonstrate the skills they've been refining all semester. The showcase began with a violinist, then a cellist, followed by a vocal performance. Sophia sat entranced, absorbing every note, every subtle movement of the performers. This wasn't like listening through doors or walls. This was music in its fullest form, alive and breathing in the space around her. During intermission, Professor Williams introduced her to several faculty members. Their reactions ranged from polite disinterest to mild curiosity when he mentioned she was the cleaner's daughter with an ear for Chopin. One professor, a round-faced woman with kind eyes, seemed genuinely interested. You play piano? She asked. Not really, Sophia admitted. I just try to copy what I hear. She plays by ear, Professor Williams clarified. Never had a lesson. The woman, Dr. Chen, according to her name tag, smiled. Music finds its way to those who need it, regardless of circumstance. You should consider applying for our community outreach program. We offer scholarships to promising students who—" She was interrupted by a commotion near the stage. A young man was speaking urgently to Dr. Patel, who frowned deeply before approaching the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight change to our program. Liang Wu, who was to accompany our final performer, has taken ill suddenly. If there is a pianist in the audience who knows Chopin's Ballade No. 1 and would be willing to step in, please speak with me immediately." Sophia felt Professor Williams' eyes on her. She shook her head slightly, panic rising in her chest. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't know it well enough, and I've never played on a real stage." "You know more than you think," he replied. Then to her horror, he raised his hand. "Dr. Patel, I may have a solution." Minutes later, Sophia found herself backstage, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The violinist, a tall boy named Pavel, looked at her with undisguised skepticism. "Do you know the piece?" he asked, adjusting his bow. "Parts of it," Sophia admitted. "I've heard Liang practice it many times." Pavel frowned. "This isn't some school talent show. These people paid to be here." Before Sophia could respond, Dr. Patel ushered them toward the stage. "They're waiting," she whispered. "Just do your best." The bright lights momentarily blinded Sophia as she walked onto the stage. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her as she sat down at the grand piano, bigger and more imposing than the practice room uprights she was used to. She adjusted the bench with trembling hands, then looked up at the audience. In the third row, she spotted a group of conservatory students she recognized. One girl leaned over to whisper to her friend, and they both smirked. A ripple of whispers spread through the front rows as word got around. The cleaner's daughter was sitting at the piano. Someone laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the murmurs. Then another. Sophia felt her face burn with humiliation as she realized what was happening. They were laughing at her. This girl in her simple blue dress who dared to sit where only trained musicians belonged. Pavel shot her a concerned glance as he positioned his violin. "Just follow my lead," he whispered, though his eyes held doubt. Sophia stared at the keys, suddenly unable to remember a single note of the piece. The laughter had faded to an expectant silence that felt even worse. In the front row, Dr. Patel gave her an encouraging nod, but her eyes betrayed her worry that this experiment was about to fail spectacularly. Sophia closed her eyes, shutting out the audience, the stage, even Pavel beside her. She thought of the countless evenings she had spent listening to this piece through the door of practice room 7, where Liang had meticulously worked through each passage. She remembered how the music had sounded, not just the notes but the feeling behind them. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The first notes were hesitant, slightly uneven. But as the familiar melody emerged from beneath her fingers, something shifted. The music that had lived only in her mind for so long was now filling the hall, real and tangible. She forgot about the audience, about her fear. There was only the music now, speaking through her in a language more natural to her than words. Pavel began to play, his violin joining her piano in a dance they hadn't rehearsed but somehow understood together. When Sophia ventured a glance at him, his earlier skepticism had transformed into focused concentration, then something like surprise. The piece built toward its climax, and Sophia's fingers flew across the keys with growing confidence. In that moment, she wasn't the cleaner's daughter anymore. She was simply a vessel for the music that had called to her through closed doors for years. As the final notes faded, Sophia became aware of a profound silence. She opened her eyes to see Pavel staring at her with undisguised astonishment. Then from the back of the hall, a single person began to clap. Others joined, the applause swelling until it filled the space that her music had occupied moments before. In the front row, an older man with white hair and intense eyes slowly rose to his feet, still clapping. Others followed his lead until the entire audience was standing. Sophia sat frozen at the piano, unable to comprehend what was happening. Pavel leaned over, a new respect in his eyes. "Who are you?" he whispered as they took their bow. Sophia had no answer. She only knew that something had changed forever, and there was no going back to the shadows of the practice rooms now. The world had hurt her, and somehow, impossibly, it was asking for more. Sophia stumbled off the stage in a daze, the thunderous applause still ringing in her ears. Backstage was chaos, students rushing for the next performance, stage managers giving hurried directions, and now a small crowd forming around her and Pavel. That was incredible, someone said, pressing a water bottle into her hand. Where did you study before Westbrook? Asked another. Sophia clutched the water bottle, unable to form words. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline, from fear, from the strange electricity that still coursed through her body after playing in front of all those people. Pavel stood beside her, his expression a mix of confusion and grudging respect. You said you didn't know the piece, he said quietly. I didn't, Sophia replied, finding her voice at last. Not really. I just heard it so many times. Before Pavel could respond, the crowd parted, and the white-haired man from the front row approached. Up close, Sophia could see the deep lines around his eyes, the slight tremble in his weathered hands, the intensity of his gaze. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke with a heavy accent that Sophia couldn't quite place. Your name, he said. Not a question, but a command. Sophia Reyes, she answered, suddenly conscious of her simple dress, her lack of credentials, her entire existence in this world where she didn't belong. Sophia, he repeated as if testing the name. I am Maestro Abramovich. I conduct National Symphony. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Sophia had heard of him. Everyone at the conservatory had. Nikolai Abramovich was a legend, a giant in the classical music world, known for his exacting standards and rare praise. You have never played with orchestra before, he stated. Sophia shook her head. I've never played with anyone before. Or for an audience. Maestro Abramovich's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. This is first time performing? She nodded. First time on concert grand piano. Another nod. Who is your teacher? Sophia swallowed hard. I don't have one. I just listen and try to play what I hear. The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. Maestro Abramovich stared at her, his piercing eyes seeming to look straight through her, searching for the truth behind her words. Impossible, he finally said, though his tone suggested he was challenging his own assessment rather than her statement. Dr. Patel appeared at the maestro's elbow. Sophia is the daughter of our evening cleaning staff, she explained in a low voice. Professor Williams discovered her playing in a practice room recently. Maestro Abramovich's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You work here? As cleaner? My mother does, Sophia clarified. I help her sometimes. The crowd had grown larger now, with faculty members and students straining to hear the conversation. Professor Williams pushed his way through, coming to stand protectively beside Sophia. Maestro, I believe we should continue this discussion somewhere more private, he suggested. The showcase is still ongoing. Maestro Abramovich nodded curtly. Yes, my guest suite. 10 minutes. He turned to Sophia. You will come. It wasn't a request. 10 minutes later, Sophia found herself in a luxurious suite on the top floor of the conservatory's guest residence. She had never been in this building before. It was strictly for visiting artists and distinguished guests. Her mother cleaned the common areas, but the individual suites were handled by a different service. The room was elegant but simple, a living area with comfortable furniture, a small kitchenette and a baby grand piano in the corner. Large windows offered a view of the city lights spreading out below them. Present were Maestro Abramovich, Professor Williams, Dr. Patel, and Dr. Chen, the kind-eyed professor from earlier. Sophia sat perched on the edge of a sofa, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. Play something else, Maestro Abramovich said without preamble. Something you know well. Sophia looked uncertainly at the piano. It's all right, Professor Williams encouraged. Just like in the practice room that night. Sophia rose and walked to the piano. Unlike the massive concert grand on stage, this one felt more manageable, more intimate. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece she had fallen in love with after hearing a graduate student practice it for weeks last winter. She played it differently than the sheet music dictated, slower in some parts, with slight variations in others, the result of learning by ear rather than from written notes. But there was a purity to her interpretation, an emotional resonance that made the familiar piece sound new. When she finished, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. Dr. Chen was the first to speak. Who taught you to hold your hands that way? Sophia looked down at her hands, confused. No one. Is it wrong? Not wrong, Dr. Chen said. Just unusual for someone without training. Your wrists are relaxed, your fingers curved naturally. Some students take years to develop that posture. I watch through the practice room window sometimes, Sophia admitted. When the good players are working, I try to copy how they look. Professor Williams shook his head in amazement. You've been studying us all along, haven't you? While we thought you were invisible. Play something else, Maestro Abramovich instructed. Something you've only heard once or twice. Sophia thought for a moment, then began a halting version of a Rachmaninoff prelude she'd heard just last week. Her rendition was imperfect. She missed notes, simplified complex passages, but the essence of the piece remained intact. Enough, Maestro Abramovich said after a minute. He turned to the other faculty members. You understand what we have found here? Dr. Patel nodded slowly. A natural talent, certainly. With proper training. More than talent, Maestro Abramovich interrupted. Many have talent. This is something else. He fixed his gaze on Sophia. You hear music differently. You feel it here. He tapped his chest. Not here, he tapped his head. What does that mean? Sophia asked. It means, my dear, Dr. Chen said gently, that you have a rare gift, one that can't be taught. Professor Williams leaned forward in his chair. Sophia, with your permission, we'd like to offer you special admission to Westbrook's preparatory program. It would mean intensive training to fill in the technical gaps in your education, but she is beyond your prep program. Maestro Abramovich cut in. I want her to audition for National Symphony Young Artists next month. The room erupted in voices. Maestro, with all due respect, she's had no formal training. The technical foundation isn't there yet. She needs time to develop properly. Sophia's head spun as the adults debated her future as if she weren't in the room. She thought of her mother, still downstairs cleaning the very halls these people walked through daily without a second glance. She thought of their small apartment, the careful budgeting for each meal, the worn-out shoes she'd been meaning to replace for months. Excuse me, she said quietly, then louder when no one heard. Excuse me. The room fell silent. I don't understand what's happening, Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt. An hour ago, people were laughing at me. Now you're talking about symphonies and special programs and auditions. She looked at each face in turn. Why, what changed? Maestro Abramovich studied her for a long moment. You played, he said simply. We heard. But I'm just... Sophia hesitated, the words catching in her throat. I'm nobody. The cleaner's daughter. Dr. Chen moved to sit beside her on the piano bench. My dear, in music we are not defined by where we come from, but by what we create. Tonight you created something beautiful. But I made mistakes, Sophia protested. I missed notes in the Rachmaninoff. I changed parts of the Debussy. Technical precision can be taught, Professor Williams said. What you have, the ability to capture the soul of a piece without formal training, that is much rarer. Maestro Abramovich nodded. I have conducted orchestras for 52 years. I have played piano for 65. I have heard thousands of students, professionals, prodigies. He fixed Sophia with his penetrating gaze. Maybe 5 times in my life I've heard someone play with the natural understanding you showed tonight. Sophia's throat tightened. What happens now? The adults exchanged glances. That, Dr. Patel said, depends partly on what you want, Sophia, and partly on practical matters like tuition, housing, schedule. Reality crashed back in. I can't afford any of this, Sophia said. And my mother needs my help with her work. There are scholarships, Professor Williams began, and the symphony has fellowship programs, Maestro Abramovich added. But these will take time to arrange, Dr. Chen cautioned. Weeks, perhaps months. Sophia's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her mother. Where are you? Everything okay? Sophia looked up at the 4 distinguished musicians discussing her future, as if all obstacles were merely logistics to be sorted out. To them, perhaps they were, but her reality was different. I need to go, she said, standing up. My mother is waiting. Of course, Dr. Patel said. But Sophia, we're serious about helping you develop your gift. Will you come back tomorrow? We can begin discussing the practical details then. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. I'll come after school. Around 4. Bring your mother, Maestro Abramovich said. She should hear what her daughter can do. As Sophia turned to leave, Professor Williams caught her arm gently. You understand that your life has changed tonight, don't you? Sophia thought about the laughter that had turned to stunned silence. then to thunderous applause. She thought about the feeling of the music flowing through her fingers, of being truly seen for the first time. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think it has." As she left the building to meet her mother at their usual spot by the service entrance, Sophia noticed a group of conservatory students watching her from the main steps. Pavel was among them, still holding his violin case. He raised his hand in a small salute, a gesture somewhere between acknowledgement and respect. Sophia nodded back, a subtle shift in the world's balance captured in that simple exchange. She wasn't invisible anymore. The music had found her, claimed her, revealed her, and now, there was no going back to the shadows. News travels fast in small worlds, and the world of classical music was smaller than most people realized. By Monday morning, the story of Sophia, Reyes, the cleaner's daughter with the extraordinary gift, had spread throughout Westbrook Conservatory and beyond. Sophia felt the change the moment she stepped into the building that evening. The security guard, who had never before looked up from his crossword puzzle, nodded at her. Students passing through the lobby after late practice sessions stopped whispering when they saw her, their curious eyes following her movements. A girl she recognized from the showcase even smiled tentatively. "Everyone's acting weird," Sophia whispered to her mother as they collected their cleaning supplies. Magdalena adjusted her uniform, a small frown creasing her brow. "It's because of what happened Friday night. Professor Williams called me 3 times this weekend." "What did he say?" "He wants me to bring you to some meeting tomorrow." "He says it's important." Magdalena hesitated. "He mentioned scholarships, Sophia, and that famous conductor wants to hear you play again." The weekend had passed in a blur for Sophia. She had tried to explain to her mother what had happened after the performance, but the words seemed inadequate. How could she describe the feeling of the music flowing through her, or the stunned expressions on the faces of people who had spent their lives surrounded by talent? "Are we going to the meeting?" Sophia asked, pushing her cart toward the practice room hallway. Magdalena was quiet for a long moment. "I took a later shift tomorrow. We'll go at 4 like they asked." She gave Sophia a searching look. "Is this what you want? To be a musician?" Sophia hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. "I don't know if I can be," she admitted. "But when I play, it feels like I'm finally speaking the right language, you know? Like I found the words I've been looking for my whole life." Magdalena touched her daughter's cheek gently. "Then we will listen to what they have to say." The next day after school, Sophia and her mother sat in Dr. Patel's office, surrounded by the conservatory's senior faculty. Maestro Abramovich was there too, his imposing presence making the spacious office feel crowded. On a small table sat a plate of untouched cookies and a pot of tea that no one had poured. Dr. Patel folded her hands on her desk. "Mrs. Reyes, thank you for coming. We've asked you here because we believe your daughter has an exceptional gift, one that deserves to be nurtured." Magdalena sat stiffly in her chair, her back straight, her expression guarded. "My daughter has many gifts," she said. "She is smart, she works hard, she has a good heart." "Of course," Dr. Patel said quickly. "But her musical ability is unusual, remarkable even." "What exactly are you proposing?" Magdalena asked. Professor Williams stepped forward. "We would like to offer Sophia a full scholarship to our preparatory program. This would include private lessons, music theory classes, and performance opportunities. And I want her to audition for the Young Artist program with National Symphony," Maestro Abramovich added. "But first, she needs intensive training." Magdalena looked at Sophia, who was sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "This sounds expensive." "The scholarship would cover tuition," Dr. Chen explained. "But there would be other costs, transportation, suitable clothing for performances, perhaps a piano for practice at home." "We don't have space for a piano," Magdalena said. "And I can't drive her to extra lessons. I work 2 jobs." The room fell silent. Sophia felt the familiar weight of reality pressing down on her newfound dream. Of course it couldn't be simple. Nothing ever was for people like them. "Perhaps," Dr. Patel said carefully, "we could discuss a more comprehensive arrangement. The conservatory has residential facilities for students from outside the city. If Sophia were to live on campus during the week—" "No," Magdalena interrupted, her voice firm. "She's 17. She stays with me." Sophia touched her mother's arm gently. "Mama, maybe we should listen. We have a small apartment near campus that's usually reserved for visiting faculty." Professor Williams interjected. It has 2 bedrooms. If both of you were to live there, Sophia could attend classes and you could continue your work here. Magdalena's eyes narrowed. You want to move us? Only if you're willing, Dr. Chen said softly. The apartment would be part of Sophia's scholarship package. It would make her training schedule more manageable. Maestro Abramovich, who had been watching the exchange with impatient eyes, finally spoke. Mrs. Reyes, do you understand what is happening here? Your daughter played piano one time, and now the most prestigious music conservatory in the country is offering her everything. You know why? Because talent like hers appears maybe once in a generation. Magdalena met his gaze steadily. I understand that my daughter has a gift. I also understand that this world, your world, is not made for people like us. That's precisely why we're trying to create a bridge, Dr. Patel said, to make it possible for Sophia to develop her talent regardless of her background. Sophia, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. Could I try? Just for a little while? If it doesn't work out, we can go back to the way things were. Magdalena looked at her daughter for a long moment, seeing the hope in her eyes, the possibility of a future so different from what either of them had imagined. There is no going back, she said softly. You understand that, yes? Once you step into this world, you will be changed by it. Sophia nodded. I already am. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Papers were signed, arrangements were made, and Sophia found herself thrust into a crash course of musical education designed to prepare her for the Young Artists audition in June. The apartment near campus was small but sunny, with large windows that let in the morning light. It came furnished with basic items and, to Sophia's amazement, a well-maintained upright piano. It's not a concert grand, Professor Williams had said apologetically when they moved in. But it will serve for home practice. Sophia spent every spare moment at that piano, working through exercises that Dr. Chen had assigned, struggling with music theory that everyone else seemed to understand instinctively, and playing piece after piece by ear, her natural gift that now needed to be supplemented with technical discipline. The work was harder than she had imagined. Her fingers ached from hours of practice. Her brain swam with Italian musical terms, key signatures, and chord progressions. Some nights she cried from frustration when a passage wouldn't come right, when her untrained hands couldn't keep up with what her ears and heart understood perfectly. But there were moments of pure joy too, when a difficult piece finally came together, when Professor Williams nodded in approval at the end of a lesson, when Maestro Abramovich, who had delayed his return to New York to oversee her training, grudgingly admitted she was making progress. Not everyone at Westbrook was welcoming. Some students watched her with undisguised resentment, this outsider who had bypassed years of competitive auditions and expensive training to land in their midst. Others were merely curious, treating her like an exotic specimen to be studied. A few, like Pavel, showed genuine kindness, offering help with theory homework or advice on navigating the conservatory's complex social hierarchy. One afternoon, about a month into her training, Sophia was leaving the practice building when she overheard 2 faculty members talking around a corner. It's a wonderful story, of course, one was saying. The cleaning lady's daughter discovered playing by ear. Very heartwarming. But you have to wonder if it's sustainable. What do you mean? Asked the other. Well, she's so far behind technically. And there's the cultural element. Classical music requires a certain sensibility. Can someone from her background truly understand Beethoven? Mozart? Abramovich seems to think she can. A dismissive laugh. Abramovich is a romantic. He sees himself in her, another poor immigrant with natural talent. But music has changed since his day. It's not enough to play with feeling. You need precision, discipline, years of proper training. So you don't think she'll make it? I think we're setting her up for heartbreak. The novelty will wear off, and then what? Back to cleaning floors with her mother? Sophia stepped backward, bumping into a trash can that clattered loudly. The conversation stopped abruptly. She turned and ran, tears blurring her vision all the way back to the apartment. Magdalena was preparing dinner when Sophia burst through the door. What happened? She asked, alarmed at her daughter's tear-streaked face. Sophia sank onto the sofa, the words of the faculty members echoing in her mind. Maybe this was a mistake, she whispered. Maybe I don't belong here. Magdalena wiped her hands on a towel and sat beside her daughter. "Tell me." Sophia repeated what she had overheard, each word a sharp stone in her chest. "What if they're right? What if I'm just a novelty, the cleaner's daughter who can play by ear but will never really be one of them?" Magdalena was quiet for a long moment. Then she took Sophia's hands, pianist's hands, everyone now said, and held them firmly. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low and intense. "When I was your age, I had dreams too. I wanted to be a teacher, but then life happened. I met your father, we came to this country, you were born, he left. My dreams had to wait." She squeezed Sophia's hands. "But yours don't have to. Yes, this world is new and strange and not made for people like us, but you have something they can't ignore, something they can't take away from you." "My playing," Sophia murmured. "Your voice," Magdalena corrected. "The music is your voice, and it's strong enough to make even those who laughed at you fall silent and listen." She reached up to wipe away Sophia's tears. "So let them talk. Let them doubt. You just keep playing." Sophia took a deep breath, drawing strength from her mother's words. Tomorrow was another lesson with Maestro Abramovich, the most demanding teacher she had ever known, but also the one who believed in her most fiercely. She would work harder. She would prove them all wrong. She would play until no one remembered she had ever been invisible. 6 months had passed since that night Sophia first sat at the grand piano while people laughed. 6 months of grueling practice, of theory lessons that made her headache, of calluses forming on her fingertips, of falling asleep with sheet music scattered across her bed. 6 months of proving herself, over and over again, and now here she was, standing backstage at Lincoln Center in New York City, about to make her debut with the National Symphony Orchestra. The journey to this moment had not been easy. The young artist's audition in June had been both a triumph and a struggle. Sophia had played beautifully, her natural musicality shining through, but her technical weaknesses had been apparent to the judges. She had been accepted into the program conditionally, a status that meant extra scrutiny, extra lessons, extra pressure all summer. She had worked with a rotating team of instructors, pianists from the symphony, professors from Juilliard, even Maestro Abramovich himself when his schedule allowed. They had drilled her on techniques that most serious pianists mastered in childhood, filled the gaps in her musical knowledge, pushed her to her limits and beyond. There had been moments when she wanted to quit. Days when the distance between where she was and where she needed to be seemed impossible to cross. Nights when she questioned whether she was just a novelty, the cleaner's daughter with a party trick rather than a true musician. But each time despair threatened to overwhelm her, something would happen to push her forward. A breakthrough during practice, a word of rare praise from Maestro Abramovich, or most importantly, her mother's unwavering belief that she belonged on that stage. Now, as she peered through the curtain at the packed concert hall, Sophia felt her heart racing. She wore a simple black dress that Dr. Chen had helped her select. Elegant without being flashy, professional without being severe. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek knot, and around her neck hung a small silver pendant, a piano key that Magdalena had given her that morning. "For luck," her mother had said, fastening the clasp. "Though you don't need it." A stagehand approached, clipboard in hand. 5 minutes, Miss Reyes." Sophia nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. She retreated to a quiet corner backstage, closed her eyes, and took deep breaths the way Professor Williams had taught her to manage performance anxiety. Nervous, she opened her eyes to see Pavel standing there, dressed in the symphony's formal black attire. He had been accepted to the Young Artist program too, no conditions attached for him, and had become something of a friend over the past months. "Terrified," Sophia admitted. Pavel smiled. "Good. The day you stop feeling nervous before performing is the day you should quit. It means you no longer care enough. What if I mess up? What if I forget the music or hit wrong notes or—" "You won't," Pavel said simply. "But even if you did, you have something most of us don't." "What's that?" "You play from here," he said, touching his chest. "The rest of us spend years learning to do what comes naturally to you." Before Sophia could respond, Maestro Abramovich appeared, his white hair wild as always, his eyes intense. "It is time," he said. "Are you ready?" No, Sophia thought. "I'll never be ready for this, yes," she said aloud. Maestro Abramovich studied her for a moment, then nodded as if satisfied with what he saw. Remember what I told you, the piano is not your enemy to be conquered. It is your partner in conversation. Listen to it as it listens to you. With that cryptic advice, he swept away toward the conductor's entrance, leaving Sophia to follow the stagehand to her position. As she walked onto the brightly lit stage, the applause washed over her like a wave. She couldn't make out individual faces in the audience, just a sea of expectant strangers. The grand piano waited center stage, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. Sophia approached it with reverence, adjusted the bench, and sat down. In the moments before the orchestra began, she scanned the front rows where special guests were seated. There was her mother, looking beautiful in a deep blue dress, a gift from Dr. Chen and the other Westbrook faculty who had come to support their unexpected protege. Beside Magdalena sat Professor Williams, Dr. Patel, and several other teachers who had been part of Sophia's journey. And there, in the fourth row, were three world-renowned pianists who had personally mentored Sophia over the summer, masters of music who had lined up to help shape her raw talent. The audience fell silent as Maestro Abramovich took his place at the podium. He gave Sophia a small nod, raised his baton, and with a flick of his wrist, the orchestra began the opening strains of Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1. Sophia waited, counting measures, feeling the music build around her. Then when her moment came, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The months of training took over, her fingers finding the right notes, her body remembering the proper techniques. But beneath the technical precision she'd worked so hard to develop was something else, something that had been there from the beginning, her natural understanding of the music's soul. As the first movement progressed, Sophia felt herself letting go of the fear, the doubt, the sense of not belonging. There was only the music now, the conversation between her, the piano, and the orchestra. A conversation she had been preparing for her entire life without knowing it. When the movement ended, there was a moment of perfect silence before the audience erupted in applause. Sophia caught Maestro Abramovich's eye, saw the slight smile on his usually stern face, and knew she had done well. The second movement was softer, more introspective. As Sophia played, memories flashed through her mind. Cleaning practice rooms with her mother, listening at doors, the first time her fingers touched piano keys, the laughter that had turned to stunned silence that night at the showcase. Each memory, each step of the journey had led her here. By the time the third movement began, with its famous thundering octaves and sweeping melody, Sophia was no longer thinking about technique or mistakes or belonging. She was simply playing, letting the music flow through her the way it had that very first night. When the final chords resonated through the hall, the audience was on its feet before the last note faded. The applause was deafening, accompanied by cheers and bravos from all sides. Sophia stood, her legs shaking slightly, and bowed. Maestro Abramovich joined her at the piano, taking her hand and raising it high in a gesture of triumph. As she looked out at the standing ovation, Sophia's eyes found her mother in the front row. Magdalena was crying, her hands pressed together as if in prayer, her face radiating pride and joy and 1,000 other emotions for which there were no words. In that moment, Sophia understood that this journey had never really been about proving herself to the world of classical music. It had been about finding her voice, her place, her purpose. And though the path had been unlikely, from cleaning practice rooms to performing on one of the world's greatest stages, it was, in the end, exactly where she was meant to be. Later that night, after the reception and the congratulations and the critics asking for interviews, Sophia and Magdalena returned to their hotel room. The adrenaline of the performance had worn off, leaving Sophia exhausted but oddly peaceful. "What are you thinking?" Magdalena asked as they stood by the window looking out at the New York skyline. Sophia considered the question. "I'm thinking about that night, when they laughed." Magdalena's expression darkened at the memory. "And now they stand and cheer." "It's not about them," Sophia said slowly, realizing the truth as she spoke it. "It never was. It was about the music." She turned to her mother. "Thank you for letting me find it." Magdalena touched the piano key pendant around her daughter's neck. "The music was always in you," she said softly. "I just helped clear the path." A knock at the door interrupted them. When Magdalena opened it, a hotel staff member stood there with an enormous bouquet of flowers. "For Miss Reyes," he said, handing over a card. After he left, Sophia opened the envelope. Inside was a note from Maestro Abramovich written in his distinctive scrawl. Sophia, tonight you showed the world what I saw 6 months ago, not just talent or technique, but something far rarer, a true musician's soul. This is only the beginning. Keep playing your truth. N.A. below his signature was a postscript. P.S. The Conservatory at Vienna has requested you for their masterclass series next spring. We begin preparations next week. Rest today. Work tomorrow.